I'm Steve Barish, founder and president of Barish Architects and Associates, Inc., a 33-year-old architecture, planning, and engineering firm. We have offices in San Luis Obispo and Pasadena, California. I hold a Bachelor of Architecture degree from the University of Arizona and a Master's of Architecture and Urban Design from Rice University in Houston, Texas. Spent 3 years in London as the first PhD student at the Architectural Association. Our firm has worked on over 500 office facilities of all types, from low-rise to mid-rise to high-rise. We've probably designed in the area of 250 to 300 ground-up facilities, and some of them have exceeded 110 feet in height. And our firm designed the first 3-story tilt-up or side-cast building in Southern California. So you can see we have had experience in both concrete and steel structures, multi-story structures of all types and sizes. I don't know all of the political undertones or pressures that the original investigation took, but from what I'm seeing and what I've been told repeatedly, there was not an independent outside empirical investigation completed here. And perhaps it's time for, before too many years pass and people pass on, that kind of empirical, thorough investigation from people who do not have any biases or political leanings occurs.
I am Dan Barnum, FAIA, a graduate architect from Rice University with a Bachelor of Architecture degree. For the 40-plus years that I've been practicing architecture, I have designed a variety of buildings from small houses to high-rise office buildings. Some of the high-rises that I've worked on are 1-shell and 2-shell here in Houston, and I was project manager for a 22-story office building in Akron, Ohio. I'm a fellow of the American Institute of Architects. And I know, because I've designed high-rise buildings and I know what they do in fires because I've studied that, I've seen stuff collapse on a construction site, formwork on a concrete pour that wasn't secured properly collapse. And it doesn't collapse at free fall speed or even near that. It sort of slows and twists and turns and that sort of thing. That's not what happened. I have an older brother who is now a retired airline pilot, but was an active airline pilot at the time. And he had told me of the safeguards that were installed all along the East Coast, particularly for New York City and Washington, D.C., so that no plane could stray into that airspace. And I said, I know that system works. Why did it fail twice? This is going on in my head. Then along comes a plane and it runs into crashes into the Pentagon. As architects, we are trained to take a whole bunch of disparate pieces of information and put them together to make a creative whole structure. So our mindset is to take a bunch of stuff and sort of connect the dots. And so I started connecting the dots, and the dots didn't connect in a way that supported the official story that we were already hearing on television.
I'm Bill Bernier, licensed architect in the state of New York for 25 years. Most of that time, I was designing data centers throughout the country. I was best friends with Frank DeMartini, the manager of construction for the World Trade Center, and I personally witnessed the South Tower being hit by an airplane. I was driving south on the New Jersey Turnpike on the morning of 9/11, and as I came through a colonnade of columns and overpasses, and the World Trade Center came into view, I noticed the North Tower looked like a giant smokestack. I was in shock. It was a few minutes after 9, and immediately got on my cell phone, called Frank. He wasn't there. By then he was already running around trying to rescue the people on his floor. I was constantly looking to my left. The South Tower, which was fine, there was nothing wrong with it, exploded. That obviously was when the second plane hit. I did not see the plane. I was 10 miles to the west. I couldn't see it, but the explosion was so intense. I was in utter shock. And by the time I got down to the job site, the people were on TV watching these two smoking towers. I kept coming back down to the TV area from where I was working, and I got down at one point a little after 10, and I said, "So what's going on, guys?" And they said, "Oh, the South Tower collapsed." I said, "What are you talking about? That doesn't make sense. There's no way. The building was designed to take the impact of one, if not more, multiple airplanes. It couldn't possibly." They said, "Look for yourself." Then I saw the instant replay, and down it came.
The building was designed to have a fully loaded 707 crash into it. That was the largest plane at the time.
Frank and I knew each other for over 30 years. We were the best of friends. We met in college. We were business partners. When he first went on board with the engineering firm that was responsible for the maintenance of the structure of the World Trade Center, was just after the bombing of 1993. He joined the damage assessment team as the architect member. It was his first foray into corporate life. I had already gone over to corporate life. And Frank had a small practice and decided he wanted to try the corporate side. So he joined, took a 6-month temporary assignment with Leslie E. Robertson, the structural engineer, and participated in the repairs and the recuperation of the towers after that attack in 1993. It wasn't until several years later when I saw a clip of the collapse of the Building 7 that was clearly caused by explosion. There was no way that that could ever have been part of something to do with the planes. It wasn't hit by a plane. There were no major fires. There was no major debris from the collapse of the North Tower, which was the closest to it. There was just no logical explanation for that building to come down, straight down into the path of greatest resistance in a little less than 10 seconds. Did not make sense. I feel that those of us who do question the attacks are being labeled as nuts and people that are off the grid and to be ignored. And it just warms my heart that organizations like Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, which I joined 3 years ago, exist, and that the movement seems to be growing.
I build lots of different things, including numerous steel-framed fireproofed buildings. Most recently, I worked on a $400 million project in Las Vegas, which includes a mid-rise building, 9 stories high. Altogether, that project had 1,200 tons of steel framing. Initially, on 9/11, I was watching those buildings coming down in just utter horror and disbelief. I must admit that it appears as if my rational judgments were suspended as to what I was seeing, because what we were told by the experts almost immediately is that this building is collapsing. And none of us professionals have ever seen a high-rise building collapse, much less being exploded in the manner in which they were. So we did not have a frame of reference with which to observe and make judgments about these collapses. For 4 years, I had heard no other explanation, and so I simply put it out of my mind, I think, like most of the rest of us professionals who really didn't want to see one reality and being told that we were seeing something else and just not have the presence of mind to evaluate all the evidence. First of all, we didn't have all the evidence. Much of the evidence is missing, so how could we properly evaluate what happened that day? So not until 2.5 years ago, upon hearing a radio program with David Ray Griffin, KPFA's Guns and Butter show with Bonnie Faulkner, did I hear any alternative explanation as to what we may have been seeing that morning. And so David Ray Griffin was talking about beams being hurled with the ends dripping with molten metal, pulverized concrete. 118 firefighters talking about sounds of explosions and flashes of light. And I started doing lots of research, and I found a lot of information available on the internet and DVDs that is not available on mainstream. And it was just shocking that there's this whole reality out there outside the mainstream. I'm a Reagan Republican. I thought I was getting information, and I thought journalists were doing their job. And lo and behold, there's this whole set of evidence excluded by the NIST, the FEMA reports, the 9/11 Commission, NIST being the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So this information is devastating to the official story.
I'm Jody Gibbs. I'm a registered professional architect. I was licensed for general building and heavy construction as well as architecture over 35 years ago. I've practiced in the United States and in other countries. I was educated at Yale University, the Harvard Graduate School of Design, the Yale Graduate School of Art and Architecture. I was honored with the Mid-Career Fellowship at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, and I taught at MIT as an adjunct faculty for a number of years in the Graduate School of Architecture. My reasons for looking and demanding and urging people to see that we get a judicial investigation are really very simple. Among many of the reasons, one, we have no explanation of how the concrete was pulverized. It takes an enormous amount of energy, way beyond what we have in aviation fuel. Secondly, aviation fuel does not melt steel, and no high-rise steel structure has ever been destroyed by a fire in the history of construction. Third, we have eyewitness testimony of firemen, policemen, news reporters, and occupants of the building to explosions, an enormous number of eyewitness testimonies. Fourth, the buildings fall at a speed which can only occur if the structure has been removed, the vertical structure. We have ample evidence of that. Large multi-ton beams were hurled hundreds of yards laterally. Gravity works vertically, not laterally. We also now have the evidence of thermite and thermate explosives.
My name is Robert McCoy. I'm an architect. I have a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of California in Berkeley in 1963. Been licensed in California since about 1964. From about 1965 until about 1985, most of my experience has been in high-rise, multi-story steel buildings. The first major high-rise building that I was involved with was the headquarters for Pacific Gas and Electric Company in San Francisco. It's a 34-story building, about 1,250,000 square feet in the high-rise portion, 288,000 in the low-rise portion. It was designed and built in 5 years or thereabouts, about the same time that that the World Trade Center was designed and built in New York. In fact, we corresponded with the Yamasaki's office at the time to discuss certain aspects of their building and ours. Both buildings were designed, for instance, to resist the impact of an airplane flying into them. While with that firm in San Francisco, Hertzka Knowles, I also participated in the design of 575 Market Street, a building for Standard Oil, one of their headquarters buildings. It was 44 stories. 100 Pine Street, which is 34 stories. It's an unusual building with very large cantilevers. And following PG&E, I finished up the final design, redesign, and construction of the St. Mary's Hospital and Medical Center in San Francisco. That's an 11-story steel frame building, about 500,000 square feet overall. Following that stint, I was in private practice for a period when William Pereira acquired my firm to give him a presence in San Francisco. He had a couple of high-rise buildings to do, one of which was One Sansom, which was initially designed as a 54-story building, subsequently reduced to about 44 stories when Citicorp came into the project. Another building done at the same time was 505 Sansom, which is about a 20-story building. It sits adjacent to the Transamerica Pyramid in San Francisco. I was the project director and chief operating officer for the joint venture for the design and construction of the Tom Bradley International Terminal at Los Angeles International Airport. That building is about 1 million square feet. I signed the petition for architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth because I felt it was an organization trying to get at the truth of what in fact actually happened, what brought those buildings down.
My name is Joel Miller, and I have a Bachelor of Architecture degree from Temple University in Philadelphia. And while I was there in Philadelphia, I worked for 2 firms on a couple of high-rise buildings. The 13-story Federal Detention Center for Ewing Cole, Cherry, and Brott. I spent about 2 years on that project, and then a year on a high-rise dormitory, about 15 stories for MGA Partners. And I was also in Philadelphia, actually, in the Philadelphia area, when the Meridian Bank building fire occurred in 1991. And the similarity to that fire and the events of 9/11 is what really got my interest up in this topic. On the day of 9/11, I was actually working with an artist in his studio, and we did not have television or images. We had like an AM radio. So I actually didn't see any of the images of the events of that day until later that evening. And I remember being a little bit incredulous. These buildings were designed to take multiple impacts from airliners, as well as withstand 100-mile-an-hour winds.
My name is Les Young. I'm a licensed architect in both New York State and in California. I've been involved in many large projects, including overseeing several high-rise buildings ranging in size from 14 stories to 40. Over the course of 20 years, I'm mainly called in to help with very large, difficult projects. One of the more notable projects was 55 2nd Street in San Francisco. I was involved in getting the permits for the Infinity Towers, which are 2 residential towers right on the edge of the bay in San Francisco. And interestingly enough, I was also involved in 350 Bush for Shorenstein Realty, and Ron Hamburger was the structural engineer working with me on that project right across the street from the Bank of America Tower at the time of the attacks in 2001. Ron Hamburger was one of the engineers involved in the official reports investigating the collapse on 9/11. Prior to going to architecture school, I was a professional firefighter in Dayton, Ohio for 4 years, which is why I got so deeply involved in the 9/11 Truth movement. It really upset me that our own government wasn't backing these people up, and I was watching the funerals of the firefighters, and as an ex-firefighter in the firefighters union, I wanted to give my old firefighting brothers and sisters the support they needed, and to back them up as an architect now, because I can't do it as a firefighter.
I'm Ron Brookman, licensed structural engineer in California, and I received my master's degree in structural engineering from University of California at Davis in 1986. I've been practicing structural engineering ever since then, nearly 24 years now, and have designed and retrofitted numerous steel frame structures. My experience includes commercial, office buildings, manufacturing facilities, industrial buildings. About 3 years ago, I started examining the questions about the World Trade Center disaster and other questions pertaining to 9/11. And I heard Richard Gage's interview on a CD that someone handed to me, and I immediately went to the AE 9/11 Truth website and started reading. I want to know that our buildings are safe, and I want to know that our people are safe. And it's time for people to start looking at this, because there's a real kind of cloud around issues with 9/11. I can't talk about this around certain people. Certain people just, they won't hear it, and it's very difficult. I think it's time for people to open up and just realize that in order for to heal from this, We're going to have to just get realistic about it and talk about it. Answer these questions in an open way. I've written to numerous engineers. I don't get a response. I've written to numerous Congress people. They won't respond. I've written to judges. They don't respond. But more and more people are starting to be curious. Before I made any comments or real conclusions about the NIST reports, I wanted to read them cover to cover. It needs to have more analysis, or not computer analysis perhaps, but it needs to have more study done on the parts that NIST either left out, ignored, or did improperly. My inquiry to President Obama was about the World Trade Center 7 NIST reports, the three in particular, the 1A, the 19, the 19A reports. And I pointed out that I felt these reports were just a monumental waste of time and money and a real slap in the face and a national disgrace. And apparently that, struck a chord in the White House somewhere, and he wanted the director of NIST to respond to that. So when I got a response from the director of NIST, he was talking about the Twin Towers. He wasn't even talking about World Trade Center 7. That's the most interesting thing right now, is actually trying to communicate with the people who are responsible for the World Trade Center study and find out what they're thinking. I mean, I really want to know what they're thinking. And when I read some of their writing, I think, what are they thinking? It's hard to figure out. But I'll keep communicating, I'll keep corresponding with them. Because every bit of information you get from them is valuable. It really is. We need a new investigation of all the World Trade Center high-rises. We need a new investigation of the entire event, or the series of events that occurred on 9/11. There are so many unanswered questions. It's not just the buildings. People want to put this behind them, I'm sure. They don't want to think about it, but it's really caused so much havoc in the whole world that I think it's to the benefit of people to just wake up and realize what's going on here, and try and get some justice, try and get some honest truth, some answers.
My name is Michael Donley, PE. I'm a structural engineer with 14 years of experience. I get involved mostly with the design of steel-framed, fireproof buildings. I've worked on public and private projects. Currently working on a building stabilization project in Jersey City. Past projects have included a project for the DEP in Queens, New York, which involved over 1,500 tons of steel framing, where I was responsible for the review of shop drawings, fabrication drawings. I'm a principal of Donley Engineering Group here in Hackensack with 6 employees. On September 11, 2001, I was working in a small engineering design office, and when news came that the towers had been hit by an airplane, we put on the television, proceeded to watch like the rest of the country did. And I never suspected that the towers were going to collapse. None of us in that room, none of the experienced engineers that I work with, made a comment that, wow, I think those towers are going to come down. None of us had the intuition that we rely on. None of us felt that that was going to happen. And months following, I really thought that maybe it was my judgment was bad, that why didn't I see that this was going to happen, that the buildings were going to collapse? And I really felt embarrassed. And none of us in the office really talked about it too much after that, it seemed. About 2 years later, I had a friend that asked me if it was possible for the Twin Towers to achieve near free fall speed when they collapsed. And I thought about that. I mean, I have a physics background, certainly even from college and high school, advanced courses in my engineering curriculum. that made me think, and it led me into doing my own research into the FEMA report, the 9/11 Commission report, finally the NIST report. And I went through those reports exhaustively. I wanted to know what happened. You know, my country was attacked. I'm a structural engineer, and I want to know the facts. So I did my own research and quickly realized that, you know, my judgment wasn't suspect, that the tower should not have collapsed. And that, you know, that reassured me that, you know, my own ability was called into question. And then I realized that, you know, those towers shouldn't have collapsed on 9/11.
My name is Stephen Dustewald. I'm a licensed professional structural engineer with 37 years of experience in the structural field. I have 25 years of experience as owner and principal of my own structural engineering firm here in Las Vegas. I have focused on nuclear power plant design, large commercial and industrial buildings, and utilizing design of all four major structural materials: concrete, steel, masonry, and wood. I first became aware of the problems with the official account of the collapse when I saw a DVD online from Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. They pointed out various problems with the official story, and the ones that caught my attention were the rapid failure of the connections in order for the building to come down at the rate that it did. In my 37 years of experience as a structural engineer, I've never seen modes of failure such as have been exhibited in the case of these buildings, and that's why I feel that we need a new independent investigation to explain the destruction of these three buildings.
My name is Rick Folks. I'm a structural engineer with over 40 years experience in engineering. I'm a president of my own engineering business here in Arizona since 1983. Prior to that, I was a vice president with prominent engineering firms in the Phoenix area. I have experience designing large structures, including power plant structures, shopping center structures, schools, commercial buildings, you name it. I know structural design, and I know that on September 11th, when I saw those twin towers coming down, I knew there had to be more to the story than just a fire causing those failures. That had to be a controlled demolition that we were witnessing. We have been told nothing but lies about this, folks. The government has lied to us, and we need to get to the truth.
I'm Alfred Lopez. I'm a registered professional structural engineer in the state of Michigan and have been in private practice for 40 years with Lopez Engineering. I've worked on several high-rise projects with office buildings above parking decks and high-rise apartment buildings here in the Detroit area. I've done numerous investigations of failures of buildings because of fire and wind damage, and also of determining what can be saved and what has to be replaced in the buildings. As a structural engineer for 49 years, I've investigated numerous failures, and I could not understand how fire could cause the symmetrical near freefall collapse of these three high-rise buildings. In Building 7, we had the unexplainable collapse of the building against 40,000 tons of structural steel at almost the speed of free fall, and that does not make any sense. I signed the petition for the Architects Engineers of 9/11 Truth because ever since the 9/11 happened, I had questions of how this could possibly have collapsed from the fire or from the impacts of the airplanes. I just could not believe that this would be possible.
I'm Kamal Obeid. I have a master's degree in civil and structural engineering from the University of California at Berkeley. I've been a practicing engineer for the last 30 years, a licensed structural engineer for the last 25 years. I've designed and retrofitted numerous structural steel frame buildings, and I've also looked at several failures of buildings as well to determine the cause. When you look at the analysis that was put forth by the National Institute of Standards, NIST, and compare that to what you actually observe in reality. For a structural engineer, you will actually see that all the various different theories that lead up to the failure of the building that they put together in this huge document that took them 8 years to put together. Every one of these theories is flawed. For the sake of this country, I think we need to have a full investigation of how these buildings failed. This is the crime of the century, and it is important that we know everything that had to do with this. It has affected many people's lives. It is affected, because it happened in the United States, it has affected the whole planet in one way or another. It has shifted the politics of the world, and it must be investigated for that reason. But also, as a professional, as a structural engineer, I'd like to know the truth of how these buildings failed. Structural engineers and the profession need to understand that these buildings did not fail the way they're claimed to have failed.
My name is Casey Pfeiffer. I am a registered professional structural engineer in San Diego, California. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in civil engineering at the University of Notre Dame. I have been practicing engineering for 15 years, and currently I am the principal of Pacific Coast Structural Engineering in San Diego, California. As a structural engineer, we specialize in the design of hospitals, industrial buildings, and commercial office in structural steel and concrete. I was amazed and shocked that they actually collapsed, that they collapsed all the way down in the fashion that they did. And I couldn't put it together in my head as to how this could have happened. And even days after, weeks after, people that are not familiar with structural engineering would ask me, and I had a hard time giving them any kind of real explanation because I didn't know a lot of what's going on. And because when events like this happen, there is such a media buzz for constant media buzz that I couldn't take watching it anymore. It was like a bad song on the radio. I just had to set it down. And then, of course, the media gives you its version of the story, and so it's easy as to take that version of the story as what it is until you're able to see facts. So I didn't look at it again until a friend of mine gave me a Blueprint for 9/11 Truth DVD to review. The evidence that I saw was so compelling that it became obvious that the official story was not correct. I signed the petition for a new investigation into the destruction of the 3 towers at World Trade Center because I felt that the official report was inaccurate. And based on the evidence available through the help of the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, I feel that we must demand a new investigation into the destruction of the World Trade Center towers and NIST itself.
My name is Jonathan Smolens, PE. I'm a professional structural engineer in the Boulder, Denver area for the past 12 years. And one of my specialties is forensic engineering, including evaluation of structures post-disaster. It would be incredibly improbable for one building to collapse perfectly symmetrically, and all 3 of them to do the same is just incredibly unbelievable. And then just all the other evidence of seeing flashes and explosions and the melted metal and the dust particles and with the explosive chemicals found in the debris. There's just a lot of questions about what's been going on, and that these questions have not been answered or even addressed in any sort of full way leads to many more huge questions as why this has not been addressed and why that isn't happening. The explanation provided does not match the evidence that we have. Therefore, I signed the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth's petition demanding a new investigation.
My name is David Topete. I have a Master's of Science degree in Civil Engineering. I am a licensed structural engineer. I design new structures and retrofit existing structures from concrete or masonry or structural steel. Currently, I am doing the structural design for an 11-story mid-rise office building here in San Francisco. Naturally, when the events occurred back in 2001, a lot of emotions obviously were not only myself, but my wife, my spouse. She's a correctional peace officer, so I put myself vicariously in her shoes if she were to be a first responder for some type of an event like that happened here. I was doing an internet search, and as I continued my search, I came across the website of Architects Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and I reviewed the information that was presented on there. I looked at, there was apparently blueprints, for example, the construction drawings from towers 1 and 2 that were available, the structural drawings, and there was just a lot of information relative to the incidents and to the collapses relative to towers 1 and 2. And what we saw in Tower 7, it was almost a precise, exact, orchestrated, I want to say. I mean, it was precise in that the failure occurred within a matter of a split second or two. Again, for a fire to make that happen, it would take hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. We would see that the structural steel itself and the construction of the building, the fireproofing and whatnot, there would be an added level of protection to the structural steel itself, to the primary structure itself. And again, for Tower 7 to have such a catastrophic immediate failure, the only thing that will lead to that would be explosives. I noticed that there was a petition that you can sign on, and I reviewed a lot of the names that were on there. A lot of people from academia, a lot of professors, a lot of architects, a lot of structural engineers, chemical engineers, physicists. So there was quite a bit in my perspective, quite a bit of people that were technically, I would say, more technically competent of reviewing the information that was available and kind of saying, hey, this doesn't quite seem right. It's very difficult to comprehend that the NIST report would bypass and would omit and would strike out some other evidence that has been found. We need to have a new investigation of the failure of towers 1, 2, and 7. And I think we need to have an investigation of NIST themselves. I believe that the reports that came out are not true. I believe there's a lot of information that was omitted, blatantly or otherwise.
I'm Frank Cullinan, a practicing civil engineer in the state of California. I have a Bachelor of Science from Chico State, which I received in 1988. I've been a licensed civil engineer since 1993. I specialize in bridge construction, retaining wall construction, small building construction, bridge demolition, and I have experience in bridge design and building design. Behind me is a temporary support system for a new bridge being constructed. This new bridge contains structural steel and concrete. Structural steel is required by building and design codes to prevent catastrophic failure and loss of public life. Everybody's seen the building collapses on 9/11, and it was shocking how fast the buildings collapsed. Tens of thousands of structural connections not only had to fail nearly simultaneously, but in sequential order. Therefore, I've joined Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, an organization consisting of 1,000 architects and engineers demanding a new investigation, not only to the building collapses, but of NIST, National Institutes of Standards and Technology.
I am Richard Heumann. I am a retired professional electrical engineer. I went to Brooklyn Polytechnic Institute and received the Bachelor of Electrical Engineering degree in 1954. I worked for Joseph Flooring for 41 years and was Principal Chief Electrical Engineer for the World Trade Center complex. After I left college, through a ROTC program, I joined the Army Corps of Engineers and went to Fort Belvoir School in Virginia. The engineering school at Fort Belvoir was noted for very extreme courses on bridge building and demolition. Thereon went to an assignment in Korea where I was the electrical engineer for 8th Army Command in the Far East. My first suspicion that something was wrong was when I was actually watching live television of the incident with the towers when the planes hit and when they collapsed. I was in a state of shock because it was unbelievable to me, knowing the strength of the structures, that a single incident of a plane impacting and fuel burning would be the reason for the towers to collapse. I just did not believe it. It was like a dream, a nightmare. The pancake theory that was initially proposed did not work. It was not feasible because if the floor's pancaked, the columns would still be standing. After watching the DVD from the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, I was compelled to look into the matter in much more detail in my mind and in my memory. And even though I'm an electrical engineer, I took basic courses in structure while going to college, as well as physics and industrial chemistry. So I'm not unknowledgeable about these trades. I strongly feel that an international commission should be formed to look at this matter in an unbiased manner and come to a conclusion that could be presented to the entire engineering community.
I'm William Rice. I worked for one of the nation's largest design-build construction firms on commercial and industrial and institutional projects in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore areas. I, of course, majored in structures. I was a member of the Tau Beta Pi Engineering Honor Society as a professor and taught engineering materials, structures lab, and other building-related courses at Vermont Technical College to architectural engineering students for 20 years. But then in 2006, I was given a DVD of a lecture by Professor Stephen Jones of Brigham Young University, and I saw for the first time Building 7 collapse. The building fell in 6.5 seconds. That was the second shock after watching the towers collapse. There was also a third shock to me, to know that those buildings came down with explosives, and our country would like to not let the public know about it. They could keep it off their TV screens, but any engineer or most any person watching that building collapse will recognize it, as Dan Rather did, as controlled demolition. And for me, this is a sad point in our country's history if the media can keep this under wrap and we cannot get a real investigation on what happened on 9/11 when all these people from around the world were killed.
I'm Tony Zambodi. I'm a mechanical engineer from the Philadelphia area with over 20 years of experience in the aerospace industry, where I design structures for aircraft and spacecraft and support equipment. I started looking at the building collapses that occurred in New York City on September 11, 2001, after reading a paper, hearing about and reading a paper from a BYU physics professor, Dr. Stephen Jones, where he discussed what seems to be huge amounts of molten metal found in the rubble of just the 3 buildings that collapsed. Since then, I've written several papers due to my own research on the subject, and I've come to the conclusion that what we've been told as to how these buildings did collapse is false. It's unfortunately not the way it occurred. And something I've done in the last few months was written up a series of 24 substantiatable points which show that the leaders of the NIST World Trade Center investigations were less than forthright in their analysis, and that they themselves should be investigated for this reason. I'd like to ask you to join myself and over 1,000 other architectural and engineering professionals who are demanding a new, independent, and impartial investigation with subpoena power into just exactly how these 3 buildings came down.
My name is Gary Warner. I'm a mechanical engineer. I hold a professional certification from the Association British Columbia. I worked as in the project engineering department of the casting plant of Alcan, the aluminum company of Canada, one of the largest aluminum smelters on the planet at the time. And in that smelter we turned aluminum oxide into aluminum. I spent 2 years casting that. I have a company that manufactures very, very large tents, tent-like structures, used, for example, in the Middle East. The last one we did was a massive one for the King of Bahrain. We were the first structure to be built at Ground Zero over the subway station. We do tons of it. We do tons of aluminum product every year, welding it and making the trusses out of the aluminum. We know quite a bit about aluminum. My company produces amazing space. It's a mixture of architecture and engineering. The architecture simply comes out of the mathematics of it. It's sort of, you might say, where mathematics meets emotion. So we provide worldwide, and we do so by ensuring that the engineering is all done well, and I can sleep at night after the job is done. That's what it's all about for me.
My name is Mark Basile. I'm a chemical engineer. I have a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering from Worcester Polytechnic Institute. I've worked for about 25 years in industry, and the majority of what I do is analytical work and figuring out what materials are composed of, why they are what they are, why they do what they do. It's basically a lot of material science is what I do. I presently work building optical detection systems for chromatography systems. I started looking into 9/11 from the beginning. I had some serious questions based on some of my readings. An example there would be the R.J. Lee report, and then the FEMA report, Appendix C specifically, that got into some metallurgical analysis of some steel beams that were found from the World Trade Center location, which were actually analyzed by professors at the school that I went to, WPI. There were sections of them that clearly showed melting. They had sections that were thinned away, and there were actually holes through them, and some of the ends were just melted away or even possibly evaporated away. In December of 2007, Stephen Jones, Professor Jones, came to Boston for a 9/11 conference, and he was going to be speaking about his work with the iron-based microspheres that he, as well as the USGS and R.J. Lee, had all reported on. So I approached him, and I was interested in being put in contact with a source for World Trade Center dust to independently look at the material and either confirm or deconfirm what he had found. About a month later, I received my first sample of World Trade Center dust from Jeanette McKinley. I found iron-based microspheres in there, just as he had done, and I also found the red-gray chips that he had spoken of. I then began to do some analytical work on them, and I found that their composition was basically exactly what he had described. There's no reason why I should be looking at these things alone. The more people who can confirm, just like I've done, confirming the work of others, the more confidence we all have in the legitimacy of those results. And these chips are not naturally occurring. They are not going to form because some materials fall down in a building and touch each other and get compressed together. That's just not what this material is. And again, I would say that anybody who thinks that should get some, should look at them, should analyze them, and come to their own conclusions after actually doing some work versus simply just, guessing that something happened. And that's why I did it. I did it because I had questions, and I said the only way I'm ever really going to know is if I get a sample and I do it myself, and that's what I did.
I'm David Gregg. I have a bachelor's in chemistry from Dartmouth. I have a master's and PhD in chemical engineering from the University of Illinois. Afterwards, I went to work for Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, where I worked there for more than 30 years. As part of working there, in the first year, I started the laser fusion program there, which eventually evolved into the largest program at the lab. I had no idea that 9/11 had been a planned event, and I didn't think it was, and didn't even look at it until Richard told me that he had heard David Ray Griffith on a radio program, and started to look at it, and I said, Richard, don't tell your friends at work about this, okay, because they'll think you're nuts. And so I said, Richard, let me look at this. And so we went and looked at the DVDs, and I said, that's all I needed to look at. It was very, very obvious.
My name is Niels Harriet. I have a master and a PhD in chemistry, and I'm associate professor at the University of Copenhagen. And I have been so for almost 40 years. And I'm 65. I have published close to 60 peer-reviewed papers in the best journals. And currently I'm involved with research X-ray time-resolved spectroscopy on time scales of 1/millionth of 1/millionth of a second. About 3.5 years ago, I saw accidentally Building 7 going down on a DVD, which was a recording from Stephen E. Jones' lecture he gave on Brigham Young University. And that caught my attention immediately because, for one thing, I have never heard about this building before. And second, I couldn't understand what was going on because apparently it collapsed with no reason at all. So that, as a scientist, I'm trained to trying to understand what's going on around me, and I couldn't understand. And from that day, I have not had any free time because later on, I started looking into it. I started working on the local scene in Copenhagen, Denmark, and I got involved with a team of scientists, which also counts Stephen E. Jones, Kevin Ryan, etc., a total of 9 people, and in a kind of research investigating the dust from the collapse on south of Manhattan. We are demanding, and I personally, as a scientist, that a new investigation, when it comes, and it will come, should also encompass in looking for remaining explosives and thermitic material in the dust by the National Institute of Standards and Technology.
I'm Kim Ireland. I have a degree in chemical engineering from Clarkson University in 1963. After graduating, I served 2 years as a reserve officer in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, where, among other things, I had training in explosives such as C4. I was involved in the industrial chemical industry for 20 years with major companies such as Union Carbide, Pfizer, Procter & Gamble, and Sterling Drug. I was the owner of Northland Chemical, and we provided custom services for companies such as Sterling Drug in their manufacturing of Bayer aspirin. Also, we produced copper nitrate, which was used as a hydrogenation catalyst for companies like Procter & Gamble. I guess it was in early 2002 that I became really interested in what did happen on 9/11. There were reports of molten steel having been seen in the rubble pile of all three buildings, and I knew that jet fuel, which is essentially kerosene, is not capable of melting steel nor iron. And I guess what really caused me to look into what happened with 9/11 was when I realized that three buildings collapsed and there were only two planes involved. So the third building came down for some other reason than jet fuel from a plane. Until the press conference, the Architects and Engineers press conference in February of 2010, my own family questioned whether I was pursuing a valid issue. And after that press conference, it left no question in my wife's mind as to whether this was a real issue or not. And that was I'm the most grateful for giving me back my wife. I noticed when I talk to people about 9/11 that they tend not to dispute the facts, but they don't want to assimilate the information and would prefer they would prefer to ignore the facts. Whereas for me, it's impossible to ignore the facts.
My name is Adam Parrott, and I have a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from Queen's University. And I've been working for an environmental consulting firm for a number of years. And I've been looking at the extensive underground contamination from various industrial and commercial properties. And for the last 5 years, I've been interested in looking at the chemical analyses that have been done on the World Trade Center dust. Ordinary fires, such as a campfire or a hydrocarbon-based fire, is not going to be able to obtain temperatures high enough to reach levels to melt steel. So that was the first thing that caught my attention. When I looked into it further, there had already been these papers published by Stephen Jones, and later there was a paper by Niels Harrit.
My name is Kevin Ryan, and I'm a chemistry laboratory manager. I've got a chemistry degree from Indiana University, and I'm also a certified quality engineer through the American Society for Quality. And I've worked in analytical chemistry laboratories for 21 years. During that time, I worked as site manager for Underwriters Laboratories in South Bend, Indiana. And so the reason I began questioning 9/11 is because the towers fell in a very short period of time. One of them fell in less than an hour, despite the fact that the New York City Code requires fire resistance of 2 to 3 hours. The floors require 2 hours of fire resistance, and the column assemblies 3 hours of fire resistance. So there was a big predicament there between what actually happened to the buildings and what should have happened with respect to UL's testing. So I asked a lot of uncomfortable questions at UL for about a year. I was told or asked to wait for the report by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, otherwise known as NIST. They were doing the investigation. They were the federal agency through the Department of Commerce that was responsible for that investigation. And UL was helping them with that investigation. So actually in August of 2004, UL, my own company, did tests on floor model assemblies that were made to mimic those that were used in the World Trade Center towers. And then they were subjected to the normal standard test for fire resistance, which is called ASTM E119. And this test brings the furnace up to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit and as an average temperature, and holds it there for a period of hours. And the result was that none of these floor model samples failed to hold their load. And in fact, they barely sagged at all. In reality, in the physical test result, they sagged only about 3 to 4 inches in the middle. And unfortunately, the NIST report then took those results and created a summary saying that the floors actually had sagged 42 inches. So they highly exaggerated the sagging of these floor models. And that was one of the reasons that in October of 2004, when I saw their draft presentation for the report, I wrote them a letter asking about how they could contradict their test results in their report. And I got fired from UL for doing that. They told me that this letter harmed their relationship with their client NIST, and that they felt I used poor judgment in allowing my questions to become public. So over a period of time, after being fired, I got more involved in questioning 9/11 and learned a great deal more about the events. So what we at Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth would like to see is an open and honest investigation into what happened at the World Trade Center on 9/11. And we need this information, we need the truth, because our nation has invested so much in the official story of 9/11 and in terms of what we have assumed that has happened. And we really can't go down the same road without knowing what actually happened. And we need justice for the victims, and we need peace in the world.
I've been practicing in California since 1967. I'm a graduate of the University of California, and my practice has included, among other things, design and testing of structures that were designed to withstand blasts. Specifically, for instance, the launch facilities for the Minuteman missile system, which were designed to withstand 150 times the acceleration due to gravity, because they were supposed to be able to withstand a nuclear blast before they launched. My career spans 44 years since 1966, and I have, during that period of time, designed a number of structural, different types of structures, retaining walls, buildings, blast resistance lockers. I worked for the Air Force and the Navy as a contractor, and that combined with my military experience gives me a pretty good feel for what happens when structures fail due to explosives. I was a Green Beret for 6 years during the 60s. I was trained in the use of demolitions, and I blew a lot of things up. One of the things that we did was go out and attack structures, analyze them as to where their weak points were, learn how to place explosives at points that would cause them to fail, and then actually demolish them and analyze our results. So the method of how to attack a structure and cause it to fail with explosives was one of the things that I learned through my military training. I was watching the television like most of us on the day that 9/11 occurred, and I saw the way that the buildings collapsed. I was extremely suspicious because I didn't believe that there was sufficient energy in the collapse of the building to cause them to fall all the way down in such a short time. And when you look at the film and you see the sides of the building flying out, and you see the explosive plumes emitting from the side of the building, and you see that there were huge portions of the building thrown for hundreds of yards away from the building, then the conclusion of explosives is definitive. There's really no other explanation. This conclusion is backed up by every bit of experience I've had as a civil engineer in designing and blowing up structures to see how they fail, and also consistent with my 6 years experience in the military. What really concerns me about all this is I think we're beginning to live in a society that is in rebellion against science. Well, what we have here is an example of 2 + 2 = 4, and yet we're in a society where we can't say that, and nobody wants to recognize that. And I think that's very scary. And that's why, because it happens to fall in my professional bailiwick, I take my professional responsibility seriously, and I feel it's important for all of us that have the expertise to speak out on an issue that affects us not only as citizens of the world, but professionally. We have a professional responsibility, and I urge every engineer and architect and demolitions expert and anybody that has any knowledge in this field to examine the evidence and stand up and be counted, because the rest of the world is depending upon us.
I'm a former 12 Bravo combat engineer in the U.S. Army. We were trained extensively for 4 years in the use of plastic, liquid, and powder explosives. I'm well versed in the use of these to take out minefields, to destroy bridges, and I was trained in how to place the explosives on the bridge in order to completely destroy them or disable them. When 9/11 happened, I saw those buildings fall, and my first reaction was, that looks like controlled demolitions. However, I believed the official story because it was played to me over and over again. I heard repeated experts telling me that this was terrorists that did this and that it was planes that brought those buildings down, so I accepted the official story. And then 3 years ago, an employee of mine told me his feelings on 9/11. He believed that it was not as the government had said, that the official story was not true. And so I had every intention on using my experience in demolitions to change him and to change his opinion and show him how foolish he was being. Everything he said was factual. Everything seemed to ring true. Everything that they talked about the demolitions was in fact true. Everything was verifiable. The ejection of the materials out of the building, the manner in which it fell, the speed at which it fell, exhibited all the signs of demolitions. I wish to further the investigation, and I want to make a difference because I want this to be a safe and better place for my children, and we need to do something now or else it's going to be too late.
My name's Tom Sullivan. I worked for Controlled Demolition Incorporated, CDI, the top-rated explosives demolition firm in the world. As an explosives loader, my job was to place explosives in the buildings to prepare them for demolition. I was licensed while in New York by the New York Fire Department to handle explosives. And I worked on major projects such as Seattle Kingdom, the Three River Stadium, Philadelphia Naval Hospital, and Key Span gas holders in New York, among others. There are many steps that you need to take. So you have to understand the work is complex and precise and requires years of experience. When we implode a building, we have to have the entire floor in milliseconds go off at the same time. And that's what caused the central core to go and eventually, in a synchronized fashion, the building to drop.
My name is Scott Granger. I'm a licensed fire protection engineer. I'm licensed in 13 states. I've been in private practice for 25 years. I've been a practicing engineer for 39 years. 50% of my practice is in forensic engineering. About 20% of my practice is in fire and building code analysis work, and 10% of my practice is in structural fire protection, structural fireproofing work. Steel structural frame buildings, high-rise buildings, simply do not collapse due to fire. There has never been until 9/11 an experience where a high-rise building that was steel frame completely collapsed. There have been fires burned longer in similar structures without any collapse. Unfortunately, the government has destroyed much of the evidence. Investigation could be done that would be independent of the government, independent of all of the influences that obviously were in effect during the NIST investigation.
I'm Ed Moniak, licensed fire protection engineer for at least 25 years, and I work for a number of organizations, city, federal, large insurance companies, consultant, always in the area of fire safety, and with the goal of keeping the public safe and first responders safe. And at present, I'm working in the city of San Jose as a fire protection engineer. We strive to ensure the buildings are built in accordance with the state of California standards for structural strength and the proper exiting so that people can get out quickly and safely from a building under all conditions. Well, I became fascinated with the government's version of the events on 9/11 because this was totally contrary to everything that I've ever experienced, either working in the field of fire safety or knowing what I know about mechanical engineering. It defies many fundamentals of mechanics of materials and physics and just many fundamental engineering concepts. And even one collapse, progressive global collapse, as they call it, would have been extraordinary. But to have three occur in one day was just beyond comprehension. And it just takes a huge amount of energy to heat all that steel and concrete up. And the effect of the jet fuel was relatively short-lived, few minutes, and the firefighters know when they go into a building. They're not foolhardy. They're brave, but they're not foolhardy. They wouldn't go into a building that they know is imminently going to collapse, and so they had they knew in their hearts and their minds that this building was not going to collapse. The conclusion of the NIST report was that a single flaw occurred, and that cascaded and progressed very quickly, so the whole building collapsed. Architects and engineers in this country have a tainted reputation that we build buildings where if a single element fails, the whole building comes down. At least that's what NIST says. And this is totally untrue. So we need an international body to seek the truth in this, and not have it run by political appointees from the powers that be in Washington.
I went out to New York after 9/11 happened to show support and attend funerals, and to just be there in any way I could. And I was down at Ground Zero, several days when we watched them pull out just pieces, and it was, so emotional, and I just couldn't go there. And so I was so angry, and I just wanted, when I was told that what terrorists did it, I just wanted to attack. I mean, I was just in that mode where I wanted revenge, really, is what it came down to. And so I really couldn't go there. And my lieutenant for years had been asking me, he'd been questioning me about it. He just pointed out things that didn't make sense. And he was talking about Tower 7, and I wouldn't watch anything. I wouldn't look at the pictures because I thought he was crazy. I literally thought, how can you question our government? How can you question our country? And it wasn't until a military friend of mine asked me a question about something else, and it wasn't directly related to 9/11, but it linked to it. And so that had me look at it from a different angle, and it wasn't shoved down my throat. And so once I did that, and I started looking at the evidence, I saw some things that didn't make sense. And so then I said, well, wait a second. So I went through a range of emotions. Once I had this whoa, what we've been told doesn't make sense. And a lot of people will say this is in the past. It's not. We have people dying today that were there. They gave everything they could for America. And we as a country are ignoring them. I mean, we promised we'd never forget. But it looks to me like most people have forgotten, and they want us to forget. And we're at war over this. We've lost a lot of our freedoms over this. And we don't have the real story on what happened because there wasn't a proper investigation done. And that's all we're doing is just asking for people to just relook at this. And as firefighters, what we're really asking for firefighters is there's so many of them out there right now that I know believe the way we do because they've contacted me, but they're afraid to sign the petition. We have to demand our freedoms, and we have to live like we're free. So whether that fear is there or not, if you give into that fear, you're not living like you're free. And that's what I had to tell myself, because I was afraid to start this organization for those same reasons. And it's been difficult, but really it's liberating at the same time, because if you don't live in that fear and believe in the power of love and the power of people coming together, we can change the world.
My name is Jason Cheshire, and I'm a professional engineer, and I practice in Ontario, Canada. And I have been in the practice of metallurgy, specifically with precious metals, in the field of hydrometallurgy for the past 10 years for a major company here in Canada. The thing that most struck me about the 9/11 incident was following the incident how overflights had detected with infrared camera 1400 degree Fahrenheit hotspots on the surface of ground zero. And that being there for a week, indicates that there was something very hot going on below the surface. And that's never been explained to me. I just don't. From the official story, that doesn't. There's nothing that would add up to that kind of thing.
I'm Kathy McGrade. I have a bachelor's in metallurgical engineering from New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology, which I got in 1979. I then spent the next 30 years with 3 startup companies. The first one was named Starstruck, and we built a rocket system for delivering satellites to low Earth orbit in competition with the Space Shuttle, Arianespace, other government-funded launch systems.
When this rocket engine came to life on a test stand in the Nevada desert, its creators were awestruck.
At Starstruck Incorporated, the goal this year is to launch a rocket that will put private enterprise into orbit.
The Dolphin is a 50-foot-long, 20,000-pound rocket, created, financed, and constructed entirely by private enterprise.
Launching at sea will save Starstruck the high cost of building and maintaining a concrete launch pad complex.
The second was named Metcal, and in that company we melded together 2 different rather obscure material properties to make a heating device that would self-regulate the temperature without having a thermocouple feedback loop. It's self-regulated as a matter of the material property itself. The third company was named Crystalloom, and there we used chemical vapor deposition. We applied that to methane gas, broke open the methane molecule, and deposited diamond down as an engineering material, thin film diamond. Then after those 3 startups, I did my own company, which is fail-safe testing. That's what I'm still doing. I took a non-destructive testing technique called acoustic emission, and I applied it to fire service aerials to determine the structural integrity, to evaluate the structural integrity of their aerial ladders. The way I got into doing 9/11 research was when a friend asked me if fire can melt steel. And he was referring to 9/11, asking, can office fires melt steel? And no, it can't. Not an office fire. A blast furnace can melt steel because you're driving lots of oxygen into a closed furnace where you're capturing the heat and driving oxygen in. In an office fire, you cannot generate enough heat to melt steel. I thought it would be a fun academic exercise to look into 9/11, and the more and more I looked into it, the more I was horrified by what I saw.
I'm David Chandler. I have a bachelor's degree in physics from Harvey Mudd College and a master's in education from Claremont Graduate University and another master's in mathematics from California Polytechnic University. And I've been teaching all those subjects in high school and college level, both mostly here in California but also overseas, and quite a few different kinds of schools. In any case, I've been teaching for over 30 years. I've taught overseas, and then in the 80s, I was very much involved with during the time the Contra War was going on, and the church I was involved with in Southern California was involved with sheltering refugees from El Salvador. And so even during this whole Cold War era, there are so many things the U.S. did that people who really believe in the values of this country would be shocked if they were aware. And I had become aware, and this really opened my eyes to this. When 9/11 came around, I had to see it through that light. And I saw this as the chickens coming home to roost. I knew that we had been involved in doing so many things that undermined other countries. I initially thought, well, they're getting back. The incident, I guess, that really got me involved in doing all of this kind of analysis was actually my sister, who's not a scientist at all, but she's an English professor. But she attended a conference and got a bunch of literature and some videos and was quite interested in all this. And so she said, you got to look into this. And I said, well, okay, I'll look at it. And so she brought over these videos, and that first video that I looked at is where I saw that projectile being shot sideways, and I thought, wow, I could measure that. And I started reading everything I could find on the internet. I found Jim Hoffman's site, and there's lots of information there. And little by little, I started educating myself on what other people were thinking. And then I found, I guess, the first edition of Blueprint for Truth that came out, and so then I was aware that there was an organization of architects and engineers, people with scientific and engineering background and experience are not just buying what the media says, but are actually looking at it, and what they see is very definite evidence of explosive demolition as opposed to just some kind of a natural catastrophe. Natural to the point of after the planes crashed, it's just a natural catastrophe, the buildings came down. It doesn't work that way. The buildings don't fall down, they should not have fallen down. There's a lot of people who are very technically proficient and can understand a lot of this stuff, but they just simply won't go there. How would you be as a criminal investigator if when it looks like the mayor was involved, you're not going to go there because, oh, he couldn't have done this. And if you take that kind of attitude, you're not going to be a good criminal investigator. Well, the same thing is happening here. We have as much capacity for evil as any other people. We're all human. We're all made of the same stuff. And Arabs and Americans and Europeans and Asians, there's no difference in the capacity for good and the capacity for evil. And if we start with this kind of a racist idea that Americans are going to be good, and that this must be some kind of foreign influence because there's bad people out there, that's going to mislead us. Somebody's trying to bury all of this. They're trying to discredit any investigation into 9/11. And I don't necessarily know whether this is going to break open in public consciousness or not. All I can do is what I can do. So my part is just to look as carefully as I can and make as public as I can the kind of things I find out. And Gandhi there's a quote from Gandhi that says, what you do will be insignificant, but it's very important that you do it.
I'm Jerry Lobdell. I'm a retired physicist and chemical engineer. I have a BS in chemical engineering from Texas Tech, and I have extensive coursework in mathematics and physics from the University of Texas at Austin. My career has been spent in research. I've had broad experience in analysis and applied research, 30-year professional history spanning physics, chemical engineering, statistical analysis and modeling, and operations research. Most of my work over the years was classified defense work. And in my retirement years, I've been devoting time to continued problem solving in areas that I find of interest. I began work on the World Trade Center collapse matters in 2006 after I read Stephen Jones's paper in which he reported on the presence of the iron-rich microspheres. In the World Trade Center 7 situation, FEMA even found sulfur in steel, and they didn't understand what it was doing in there. And their report mentions that it was a big mystery as to why it was in there. Well, it was in there because it was thermate that was used to melt that particular piece of steel that they were testing. And all of the testimony of eyewitnesses, all of the video evidence supports only controlled demolition as the cause of all 3 World Trade Center buildings' destruction. So that's why I'm calling for a new investigation, an independent investigation of what happened to the World Trade Centers on 9/11. That's also why I signed the petition for architects and engineers for 9/11 truth. And I just want to say that I think this is extremely important to the health and prosperity of our nation. I think it's very critical.
I am Robert Podolsky. I have a master's degree in theoretical physics from Xavier University in Cincinnati. I worked for 10 years as a professional physicist, engineer, systems analyst for government and for industry. Companies like Avco, GE, Bendix, and also Air Force Avionics Lab and the Coast Guard Electronics Division. And in all of these places I did engineering analysis, systems engineering. And when I first got interested in what was going on, or what had gone on with the attacks of 9/11, there was a lot I didn't know. And initially I wasn't even very interested, I just accepted the generally accepted story. I calculated how much energy would it take to destroy these buildings the way they were destroyed, leaving the pieces of the size that were left and making the concrete into dust. How much energy would that take? So I calculated that. Then I calculated how much energy existed in the system to do that destruction. Well, the kinetic energy of the plane, the chemical energy of the fuel, the potential energy of the building itself. There wasn't nearly enough energy in the system to bring about that destruction. The official description violated the first law of thermodynamics. And the heat flowing uphill from a 750-degree flame to a 3,000-degree puddle of molten steel violated the second law of thermodynamics. All 3 of the World Trade Center buildings fell way faster than they would have had there been any resistance from the buildings. I think it's really important that other physicists and engineers run their own calculations following this pattern, making the similar calculations to verify for themselves and for others that what I've just asserted is true.
I'm Dr. Bob Bowman, Lieutenant Colonel, United States Air Force, retired. Flew 101 combat missions in Vietnam and directed all the DoD Star Wars programs under Presidents Ford and Carter. My PhD is in aeronautics and nuclear engineering from Caltech, and I did my postdoctoral work at the von Karman Institute in Brussels, Belgium, in finite element analysis. I taught at 5 colleges and universities, serving as department head and assistant dean. Finite element analysis is the solution of complex physical problems using advanced mathematics, things like turbulent flow or structural failure. I first became aware that there was a problem with the government's official conspiracy theory on 9/11 that very morning when I was watching what was happening on television, and my wife says I kept saying over and over, "Where are the interceptors?" And then, of course, when the first of the towers actually started falling down, I just said, this can't happen. It can't happen. And then the other tower came down, and I said, this violates the laws of physics. It can't happen. Those aircraft and those fires could not cause those buildings to come down in that way. So I guess I was a very early skeptic. Regardless of what anyone thinks about how it happened or who caused it, there's no question that the Bush administration took advantage of that to deceive the Congress and the American people into unnecessary and illegal wars of aggression, into cramming down our throats the Patriot Act and the Military Commissions Act. And these evils are going on now, even under a different administration. And so it's obvious that whichever party is in power, the American people absolutely need the truth of 9/11. It is absolutely obvious to me that we've been lied to, that the government's official story as put forward by the Bush administration and their 9/11 Commission and NIST, the whole stuff is garbage from one end to the other. It is physically impossible, and that's why we absolutely need a new investigation of 9/11. Until we completely destroy the government's official myth and get some real truth told out there, all the evils that have happened since 9/11 are going to continue. The corporate wars of aggression, the taking away of our constitutional rights, the destruction of this country.
My name is Jeff Fair. I have a PhD in Material Science and Engineering from the University of Minnesota, a BA in Physics from Brigham Young University, and I currently work as an electron microscopist. I've worked with solid-state reactions. I've worked characterizing materials, semiconductor materials, thin films. I currently do a lot of work with nanoparticles as well as solid-state reactions. The way I got involved in 9/11 research was about in 2005. I had read Steve Jones' paper on, his initial paper on why the buildings collapsed that day. And so I actually looked for Steve Jones, and I sought him out, and we talked for a little bit. I wanted to get a feel for his sincerity and his motivation for doing this, and so we talked a little bit, and then I watched one of his talks that he gave in September of 2005. So eventually he was able to get some metal samples that were from some of the steel beams from one of the towers, and we studied those. I cut up some of those steel samples and polished them to see what we would find in the steel. Some of the pieces that he acquired at the time had some corrosion. They'd obviously gone through some melting, and we thought that those might be significant. We did find an iron sulfide phase as well as an iron silicate phase. Looking at all the phases, I came to the conclusion that in order to create these phases, we'd have to reach a minimum of about 1100 degrees C. In one piece, I found a pore in the steel that had pure sulfur embedded in the pore, which I thought was very strange, and so that's when I really started looking for sulfur and finding it in more abundance in some of these phases. So then, to be honest, when Steve told me he was looking through the dust, through these dust samples, I thought this was a needle in a haystack. The significance of the calorimeter cannot be understated here. This very, very small chip had a lot of energy packed into it, more than you would find in everyday materials at the office. The aluminum and the iron and the oxygen together were very significant because this is your composition for thermite. We need to be talking about this. There needs to be another investigation of the events of that day. And that's why I signed the petition at Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth.
My name is Stephen Jones, a physicist. I received my PhD in physics from Vanderbilt University in 1978, so I've been at this for over 30 years, studying various subjects. I like to study those things that have an impact on society wherever I can, such as fusion energy. That's been my bread and butter for many years. In fact, began that probably in about 1979, my research into fusion, various kinds of fusion, starting with hot fusion, then muon catalyzed fusion, metal catalyzed fusion. And I'm still very interested in alternative energy methods. I've published papers in Scientific American, which was a paper about muon catalyzed fusion. I've published papers in Nature, a British publication, and several papers there. I've published in Physical Review Letters. I have published over 50 peer-reviewed papers in my career. Now, with regard to 9/11 research, this began for me in the spring of 2005 when I heard a speaker saying that, based on her analysis, she made this rather bold statement to a large group of people. She was speaking about something entirely different, but she paused and she said, now if you think that those World Trade Center towers came down just because they were hit by airplanes, you have some major surprises ahead of you. And this huge audience, it must have been 700 people, burst out into applause. I was one of those that was not applauding because I didn't know what she was talking about. So, but the next day or two, I got on the internet and plunged into my study of World Trade Center 7 and the anomalous events of 9/11.
So my name is Lynn Margulis. I work at the University of Massachusetts right here in Amherst. I have been teaching science for many years, since I was about 16 years old, and I've got a PhD in genetics from the University of California. I have an undergraduate degree that really counted from the University of Chicago, and a master's degree in zoology and genetics from the University of Wisconsin, and have published I don't know how many papers, but certainly over 100, probably closer to 200, at all different levels, and also many books, 25 probably, books, chapters, more than that. In 1999, I was a recipient, one of several, of the President's Medal of Science from William Clinton, and 2 days ago I received the Da Vinci Award, that is the membership in the Da Vinci Society. One must, in testing any hypothesis or trying to establish it, consider all of the relevant evidence, which may come from all kinds of places, observations, measurements, and so on. And if the criticisms lead to abandonment of the hypothesis because it doesn't fit, because the facts don't fit the idea, then the hypothesis must be abandoned and replaced with something more adequate. And as science goes on, the adequacy of the basic idea and the hypothesis is corroborated over and over again by lots of people from lots of angles. And there's nothing to back up the claim that they ever even did a scientific report at all, NIST. They don't even discuss the collapse. They discuss all sorts of other things, arguing from authority in a document that's 10,000 pages. So, I mean, the first thing they do is ignore, in all cases, the most obvious and reasonable hypothesis that is consistent with all other losses and destructions in a very short time of buildings. The buildings came down because there was very carefully controlled demolition with high explosives that had been planted many weeks, if not months, before. And what is worse is that all of the evidence was removed. You can't do science without evidence. And you had these steel columns in nice, even pieces, and they were whisked away, and evidence was destroyed or removed systematically, extremely close to the time that the crime had occurred. This is not only unscientific, it's illegal. Destroying and removing evidence at the scene of a crime is not the procedure ever. It's the contrary. People go in and carefully document any kind of evidence that will help them reconstruct the crime that happened. The point is, the fire protection engineers, nor I, nor you, nor anyone else can negotiate the temperature at which steel melts, and it doesn't melt with petroleum fires. So clearly, if you have to lie or deny or ignore evidence, you are not doing science at all. They're doing propaganda or publicity or whatever they're doing, but it's not science. It's not playing by the rules of science.
I'm Danielle Dupré, PhD, originally from Switzerland, where I studied psychology and psychoanalysis. For the past 15 years, I've been empowering people who have experienced significant trauma. In 9/11 shocked the world, shocked the American people. People have a hard time recovering because they find themselves in a state of cognitive dissonance, where we had two different ideas that did not go together. For example, in America, we thought we were safe, and yet now we were not. But even as a layperson, when I looked at these movies of the airplanes flying into the towers and those towers collapsing, it didn't sound right. Intuitively, there was something that was not correct. And I think it's of utmost importance to have a thorough investigation by neutral professional to give a serious answer, both from the scientific and the legal point of view.
My name is John Freedom. I'm a counselor in private practice here in Tucson, Arizona, where I've been for the past 20 years. I hold a master's level certification in NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming, and additional certifications in thought field therapy, the emotional freedom technique, acupuncture detox, and also energy psychology. And I also serve on the board of directors for the Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology. I serve as the chairman of their research committee. A lot of people have been wondering why there has been this massive level of denial of people around the incidents surrounding 9/11. And I think there are several reasons for this. One is that we tend to be creatures of habit, and beliefs are habits, just like, eating, drinking, or sleeping. And we tend to believe and then become attached to and even identify with our personal beliefs, and then we'll defend them if they're challenged in any way. A lot of people experience this phenomenon of cognitive dissonance and simply cannot deal with it and tend to either deny it or push it away. And for some people, they just do not even want to go there just because it's too uncomfortable. Another thing that happens is that we human beings tend to have a need for closure. And simply not knowing is uncomfortable. We're taught that we're supposed to know, and we don't want to appear stupid, and we want to have an opinion for everything. And so when there's this social, societal pressure to not only have an opinion, but to reach closure about something, and then once we have come to our opinion, whatever that is, it can be very difficult to challenge it. When we're confronted with new data or new information, we tend to ignore or rationalize or even deny that new information. So what is the solution? This is something that I've been pondering about over the last several years. And to be honest, I don't know. But one thing that has become important for me personally is to educate myself, is to take responsibility. This is one of the defining issues of our time. And if we wish to see change in this issue, each of us must go out of our way, educate ourselves, take the time to learn about this, and then begin dialoguing with our children, our parents, our families, our neighbors, and let them know why this is important, and getting the word out there and getting other people involved. There's that wonderful quote from Mahatma Gandhi where he said that we must be the change that we wish to see in the world.
I'm David Ray Griffin. I taught philosophy of religion and theology at the Claremont School of Theology and Claremont Graduate University. I published about 35 books in my field, but then starting in 2004, I started publishing about 9/11, and since that time I have published 10 books about 9/11. I think people are very different, so I don't think there's some universal solution to how we get people to break through, even if they are religious people. All I can do is talk about my own experience. When I was first presented with the idea that 9/11 was an inside job, that 9/11 was a false flag operation, I did not dismiss it out of hand, and I think that is because of my religious background and the fact that I've talked and written a lot on this, and freed myself from the nationalism that I grew up with. And of course, that was a very gradual process over many, many years. But because I had made that distinction between my Christian faith and my devotion is too strong, my commitment to my own country. Because I had made that distinction, I was able, when the person said, this is a 9/11, I said, well, give me the evidence. So he sent me some evidence, some websites. I looked at them and didn't find the evidence convincing. So I went back to the work I was doing. 6 months later, somebody else sent me information. I looked at it again. And even though I had said, oh, well, I've already decided that stuff's not true, another colleague sent me this different evidence. So I looked at it, and this time it clicked. I saw stories that were in the mainstream press, New York Times, nothing in the left-wing press, nothing unusual, only mainstream press stories. And yet I saw there were dozens, even hundreds of such stories that conflicted with some aspect of the official story about 9/11. And so I started looking at that evidence. So when I say there are different kinds of people, I'm one of those types of people who will be convinced by evidence. Other people are paradigmatic people. They have a paradigm. They say, this is the way the world works, and I'm convinced this is the right way the world works. 9/11 doesn't fit into that paradigm. So I don't need to look at the evidence. It's paradigmatic. And then there's a third type of person that we often call wishful thinkers. I call it wishful and fearful thinking. So they simply will not believe something that they fear to be the truth. And I found that maybe to be the most powerful factor of people rejecting 9/11 truth and not even entertaining the evidence. I had one woman, after I presented what I thought was a very convincing lecture, she came up to me and she said, I simply refuse to believe what you've said because I do not want to live in a country where the leaders would do such a thing. That is fearful thinking with a vengeance. And it's very common. So, and that fits into this nationalism. This is the fear that the country that I thought we had, this really good country, this country that's better than other countries, you're telling me that's not true. That is frightening I simply refuse to believe it. I will not listen to any more evidence, whatever it is. So there are many things that people would say. In the last 10 years, this country has gone way downhill, not only economically and militarily, but legally, spiritually. Our own self-respect is being undermined, is being destroyed by the things that the government is doing, and nobody is held accountable. I think the best thing we can do is get people to make the connection that all of this has resulted from 9/11.
I'm Robert Griffin. I am a licensed psychologist practicing in Pennsylvania for 25 years. I am a member of Psychologists for Social Responsibility, and I am past president of the Northeastern Pennsylvania Psychological Association. Reprocessing 9/11 will inevitably stir up new hurts. We've already been through the trauma, but now realizing that there's a different meaning cuts in a different way. Unless we want to tolerate the being led in a direction on false information, then we need to be closer to the truth. And then we can straighten out our direction. But if we have the wrong facts, we have the wrong solution. Acknowledging a problem is part of solving it. I have to confess, I have not been the most courageous person on this issue. I have gone back and forth, denied it to myself, not spoken about it, for fear of what others would think, whether they would think that I was crazy and that I would lose credibility. And so it's hard for me to get the courage to speak out. I have to confess that is true. I don't feel, though, that I do our country a service if I don't speak out. I feel that I am not doing my responsibility by not speaking out as long as I have, and that doesn't feel very good to me. It also takes away meaning for me to let a problem like 9/11 being unresolved fester without me trying to participate. And it is a way of giving up. When something happens to us and we don't know what it is, we can be a victim. When we know what's happening and we allow it to continue, we become a volunteer. We must not be a nation of volunteers for this type of treatment. And the values that have come from the official story corrupt us emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. We don't deserve to be corrupted. We need to stop the psychological abuse and manipulation of the American people. If we don't, then we are participating in it. One of our human rights is to live without fear, without psychological abuse. Facing the truth about 9/11 is part of ensuring that the people in America have that right to live without fear, and that our children and grandchildren do not experience the same thing. So let the facts speak for themselves. Let whatever truth exists come out. What is true is true. It doesn't need to be defended. Lies need to be defended. Things that are untrue will always be untrue, and they will always need to be defended. But the truth is there to see.
My name is Bob Hopper, and I have a PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Cincinnati. For the past 29 years, I've been a licensed PhD clinical psychologist in Boulder, Colorado. We are indoctrinated from an early age to believe that America is good and that we are exceptional. We are the shining beacon in the darkness, a voice for freedom and justice. This patriotic indoctrination is carried out by schools, the military, churches, the media, and other institutions. It's repeatedly hammered home throughout our lives, over and over and over again. No wonder Americans go into denial at the suggestion that our government committed a crime against its own people. A second reason for accepting 9/11 truth is that people differ in their ability to question authority. Stanley Milgram did a famous psychological experiment about 50 years ago. Now, they've done a number of replications of this study and have found that 61 to 66% of people were prepared to inflict what they believed was a fatal shock at the bidding of an authority figure. So roughly 2/3 of the public can show blind obedience to authority. A third reason for the difficulty with 9/11 truth is that people differ in their openness to information, which may be in conflict with their beliefs. There's a body of research that indicates we seek out information that's consistent with what we believe, and we avoid information that's inconsistent with what we believe. There's even some recent research showing actual structural brain differences between those people who are open to new experiences and new facts and those who hang on to, they are unchanging in their ideas and information. A fourth reason for the difficulty is previous knowledge. If you are already aware of false flags operations, the truths of 9/11 fit much more consistently into your psychological structure than if you're hearing this for the first time. There will always be people who cannot accept the truths of 9/11, even if the perpetrators publicly confessed. But for most people, the truth can be accessed.
My name is Marty Hopper, and I'm a PhD clinical psychologist from the University of Cincinnati. I've been working and living for the past 30 years here in Boulder, Colorado. For the past 11 years, my work has focused on helping people who have experienced personal trauma. We know this had a very severe and traumatic impact on a majority of the population. I myself cried for weeks after September 11th. A friend of mine who is a psychologist in practice here in Boulder said that her caseload increased tremendously after 9/11, and people that she hadn't seen in 10 years were coming back into her practice. So I think it's safe to say that collectively as a nation, because of what happened on September 11th, we experienced trauma. So I think that an analysis of trauma and our individual reactions to trauma helps explain at least why some people and some Americans cannot hear or approach the facts about what happened on September 11th. So how do we move forward? Can people heal from experiencing trauma or from witnessing traumatic events such as September 11th? Absolutely they can. They can heal. How do we help them heal? How do we help them gain trust again in others? How do we help them regain a sense of control in their lives? I think at first glance, the truth about 9/11 can be re-traumatizing, and people are afraid to look at it. But if handled with empathy and with compassion, I think the truth about 9/11 allows us to connect with people. It empowers us as survivors of this in going through or taking actions about it. It can help us overcome our own feelings of helplessness and loss of control about what is going on with our government. It really can help set us free. People have lived through trauma and traumatic events throughout history, and they will continue to do that. I think the resiliency of the human spirit in overcoming tragedy cannot be overestimated.
I'm Dorothy Lorig. I have a master's degree in counseling psychology from the University of Colorado, and I've been practicing reevaluation counseling for over 16 years. But what I'd like to talk about today is how learning about 9/11 affected me as a mother and as a person who's long been concerned with social justice issues. On the day of 9/11, I saw the second plane crash into the South Tower. I got to the TV just in time to witness that. After 9/11, we seemed to talk about nothing else at our office and with my friends, and I remember in a reevaluation counseling session just crying my heart out as I thought about the children who were orphaned on that day and thinking about the people who were forced to jump out of the towers and, you know, the terror they must have felt. And I couldn't get my head around how people could have been so mean, so hostile to do that, knowing how it would affect people. However, I also was having some misgivings about the official story, even early on. As a student of psychology, I know that behavior is purposeful. Maybe not terribly impulsive behavior, but behavior that involves a lot of planning and coordination, like 9/11 certainly did. So that misgiving stayed with me, and yet my emotional reaction to 9/11, the fear and the rage and the grief, had been so strong that I sort of put those intellectual misgivings on hold for a long time. And later on, as I researched and integrated more of the information, I also had to come to terms with the very uncomfortable feeling of being a dupe, of being a sucker, of believing what the government told me without checking it out for myself first. I consider myself to be a well-educated, mature adult, and to realize that I had just absorbed the government's story, lock, stock, and barrel, without really questioning it, was very humbling. It was not fun. It really made me question my own intelligence and my own integrity. One thing I know as a person with a degree in psychology is that psychological terms can be used to hurt people as well as to help people. And we can marginalize people. We can say that they're nuts if they believe something that the majority of us do not believe. This has been happening with people who've been learning about 9/11 and are trying to do something about it. 9/11 is a very difficult subject for people to look at. It's full of tragedy, it's very grim, it's very sad in every conceivable way, and the consequences of 9/11 have been very tragic for many, many people. But I like to also look at 9/11. I want to give people a sense of hope. Eventually, I was able to realize that 9/11 presents an opportunity for us to find our sense of integrity again, to find our sense of courage, our sense of optimism, that now that we know a little bit more about how things actually work, how wars are actually created by governments, how governments get people to go to war, we have an opportunity now, a wonderful opportunity, which fills me with great joy, to do something about it, to find a way to stop this from occurring again. There is no greater joy than coming together with people of conscience and standing up together for what's right.
I am Professor William Woodward. I'm trained in the history of science with a PhD. I also have a master's in experimental psychology. I've edited 4 books and published well over 20 peer-reviewed papers. I've taught for 35 years at a state university, the University of New Hampshire. I've been thinking for about 8 years now about the psychologist's approach to 9/11, and I've come to focus on the public and how the public is responding to 9/11, drawing first of all on the psychoanalytic approach. Most of us can relate to the trauma, which is 9/11. I remember hearing the official explanation of what happened. 19 Arabs flew planes into 2 buildings on the second day. And I found that that's the official view that has showed up several years later in the 9/11 Commission report. But those of us who are looking for a scientific explanation are puzzled because there are so many inconsistencies. For example, there was another World Trade Tower that went down, World Trade Center 7, and no one's explaining that. So we waited and we got the 9/11 Commission report. We thought that would bring some harmony, some consonance, but for us there was dissonance. The official story didn't make enough sense. We had this discrepant information. We kept looking, and finally we found something that did produce consonance, which was that there was a demolition in all 3 buildings. So my position as a historian of psychology, applying psychology to this historic event, is that we need an impartial, scientific, and legal investigation, as required by law, of any crime scene. And we should not be treating 9/11 as an excuse to go to war, but rather as a criminal act for which we have yet to do the forensic analysis, the scientific analysis, all the disciplines working together. But these are all efforts to bring to light alternative hypotheses so that the public can begin to understand, and I would say that is the route to national healing from the tragedy. To work together to expose what happened, regardless of where the evidence takes us. I know that's what we do in our police department in my hometown. That's what we expect in our state government, law enforcement. We expect at the international level, international law. I think that by putting science together with the law, we will have a psychological healing around the impossible cognition that has been produced on that day. That gets me into another line of literature, which is called false flag history. Numerous false flag events have been used to justify wars in the past. Possibly the Iraq and Afghanistan wars can be connected to a false flag event in this case. That would fit into the psychologist's explanation. Somebody generated a new Pearl Harbor, and that was used to turn public opinion into the support of war. Similarly, in my youth, the Gulf of Tonkin has been exposed as the false flag non-incident, which was used to get Congress to vote to go into Vietnam.
On August 2nd, the destroyer Maddox reported it was attacked by a North Vietnamese patrol boat. No, it was just confusion. And events afterwards showed that our judgment that we'd been attacked that day was wrong. It didn't happen.
If you look into the history of other wars, in almost every case, you find public opinion was manipulated to get us into the war, and this may be no exception. So rather than be afraid of the possibility that we were manipulated into a perception that we'd been attacked, perhaps we should summon the courage to allow experts to weigh in and have a public process to get out the truth. So that's why I have joined the 9/11 Truth Movement, to allow the light of day to shine on a traumatic event and hope that out of that can come a national healing. To overcome our fear of the traumatic event with new information would be the best, healthiest route to our collective recovery from the trauma of 9/11. That, by the way, is a psychotherapeutic insight that to gradually uncover the truth in your own life, the sources of anxiety, to make them conscious, is the royal road to recovery.
I'm Fran Schur, and I have a master's degree from the University of Colorado. I've had a private practice as a psychotherapist and as a licensed professional counselor for about 20 years. Another lens through which we can understand our situation in our country is the model of the dysfunctional family. So, for example, in a dysfunctional family, the parents abuse their children. The children, on the other hand, are dependent upon their parents. They need their parents for survival. They need to be loved by their parents. They need to feel that their parents are good So in spite of what they hear with their own ears, see with their own eyes, they will cling to their belief that their parents are good people. Then when we grow up as children, when children grow up, we have the opportunity then often to look at our family situation more objectively and to acknowledge the abuse and to choose to heal ourselves, choose to raise our children in a different way. And if it's appropriate, we may hold our parents accountable, hold them legally accountable. So just as with the individual family, it's the same with on the national level. We need the truth in order to heal.